Look at the person sitting beside you. Lean in a little. Watch the tiny movements in the face, the tightness in the jaw, the blink pattern, the small shifts in posture. Human behavior is rarely loud at first. The most dangerous person in the room is almost never the one making the most noise. It is not the one demanding attention, flashing status, or filling the air with stories about their own greatness. Most people are taught to see the narcissist as the final boss of toxic relationships. And yes, the narcissist can be damaging, but here is the twist. They are often easier to read than people think. Their pattern repeats. Validation, control, ego, panic, repeat. Once you know the rhythm, you can almost predict the next move before it happens. They are loud. They are fragile. They are usually driven by the same old fear under a different costume. But there is another person in this story, and that person is usually ignored. The quiet one, the observer, the empath. For months, sometimes years, this person sits inside the relationship taking hit after hit. From the outside, they seem soft. They seem too forgiving. They seem like they accept too much. The narcissist sees this and mistakes patience for weakness. That is the first fatal mistake, because while the narcissist is busy performing, the empath is watching, not just listening, watching, studying tone, timing, pressure points, lies, patterns, moods. They are not only feeling the pain, they are gathering data. And when a line is finally crossed, when the last second chance burns out, everything changes. Fast, the warmth goes cold, the mirror becomes glass, and the person who once cared too much suddenly feels nothing for you at all. Stay with me, because this is where the whole game flips. What makes that shift so powerful is that the narcissist almost never sees it coming. In their mind, the script is fixed. They expect tears. They expect pleading. They expect long emotional talks and one more attempt at repair. They expect the empath to keep caring no matter how badly they behave. That expectation becomes the narcissist's comfort zone. It becomes the base model they use for the whole relationship. But the empath has a breaking point too. Everyone does. And when that point is crossed, the emotional system does something strange. It does not always explode. Sometimes it freezes. Sometimes the heart steps back so the mind can step forward. The person who once used empathy in a warm way now uses it in a cold way. The feeling part goes quiet, but the awareness stays fully alive. That means the empath still sees everything, still reads everything, still tracks every signal, but now without the old softness that used to protect the other person. That is why the energy in the room suddenly changes. The narcissist speaks, but the words no longer land. The guilt no longer sticks. The gaslighting no longer bends reality. The charm no longer has a place to hook into. The empath is no longer asking, "How do I fix this?" They are now asking, "What is this really?" And once that question takes over, the illusion starts falling apart. The narcissist may still try the usual moves: rage, blame, silence, love bombing, victim acting. But now those moves look mechanical, obvious, almost sad. If you have ever seen a quiet person reach that point, you know how chilling it feels. They do not need to shout. They do not need to win the argument. Their power comes from something much more unsettling: clear sight. No hope left. No need left. No emotional fog left. And once that happens, the relationship is no longer being lived inside. It is being examined from above. This is where the real imbalance appears. The narcissist thinks they are the only one profiling the room. They think they are the reader, the tester, the one pushing buttons and measuring reactions. But all that time, the empath has been building a private map. Every overreaction, every mood swing, every brag that felt too forced, every insult delivered at the exact wrong moment, every lie told with a fake smile, every strange silence after being challenged, every sudden burst of anger over something tiny. None of it disappears. It gets stored. The narcissist believes they are dominating the story, but what they are really doing is exposing themselves over and over again. They reveal what makes them feel small. They reveal what feeds their image. They reveal what they cannot bear to hear. They reveal where the mask is thinnest. The empath may not even realize how much information is being collected while it is happening. That is the strange part. It is often unconscious. The mind notices everything long before the mouth says a word. So when the final snap comes, all that information lines up at once. The picture gets sharp, the excuses stop working, the confusion clears, and suddenly the empath understands the narcissist better than the narcissist understands themselves. That is not drama, that is pattern recognition at full speed. The narcissist usually attacks with broad force. Big words, big blame, big emotional smoke. It is messy, it is generic. But the empath, once detached, becomes precise, very precise. They know what matters. They know what the other person is hiding behind. They know the exact insecurity under the performance. And because they know it, they no longer fear it. Watch closely here, because this is the part most people miss. The danger is not that the empath becomes cruel. The danger is that they become accurate, and accuracy, delivered without emotion, can feel far more devastating than anger ever could. The narcissist's biggest weakness is not just ego, it is predictability. Their whole inner system runs on outside fuel. Praise them and they swell, ignore them and they shake, challenge them and they defend, expose them and they scramble. It is a loop, and loops can be studied. The empath studies it by living inside it. They become aware of the gap between the image and the fear underneath the image. They notice how confidence disappears the second admiration is gone. They notice how grand behavior often hides deep shame. They notice how control increases when insecurity rises. They notice that the loudest display usually covers the weakest point. This is why the moment of detachment feels so dangerous to the narcissist. Their power was never absolute. It depended on access. Access to attention, access to emotion, access to your nervous system. The moment the empath closes that door, the narcissist loses the mirror they were using to confirm themselves. And if there is one thing a narcissist cannot handle, it is a mirror that stops reflecting. That is when panic starts creeping in, not always openly. Sometimes it appears as more arrogance, more anger, more fake calm, more dramatic victim stories. But underneath it, there is panic. Why? Because the empath is no longer participating in the old dance. The steps do not match anymore. The reactions are gone. The timing is gone. The need to explain is gone. Suddenly, the narcissist is performing in front of someone who sees the entire act and is no longer emotionally captured by it. That is a nightmare for a manipulator. They can handle resistance, they can handle anger, they can even handle hatred, but indifference with insight, that is different. That takes the floor out from under them. And once the floor is gone, all that is left is the person underneath the performance, standing there without their usual tools. To understand why this shift feels so severe, think of the mind like an overloaded electrical system. For a long time, the empath has been carrying far too much current. They absorb tension, decode mixed signals, excuse harmful behavior, and keep trying to create peace inside a place that keeps producing chaos. That takes energy, a lot of it, more than most people realize. The empath is not weak for staying. In many cases, they are enduring far more than others could manage. But endurance has limits. Sooner or later, the system protects itself. The breaker flips. It is not always dramatic. Sometimes it happens in one sentence, one look, one final betrayal that makes the whole pattern impossible to deny. And in that instant, something quiet but huge happens. The emotional charge drains away. The body stops reaching. The mind stops negotiating. The nervous system says, enough. This is the cognitive snap. The person is still present, still aware, still reading every move, but the old emotional bond has released. To the narcissist, this is deeply confusing. They are used to being able to create emotional weather in the room. A sudden rage and the room shakes. A guilt trip and the room bends. A cold shoulder and the room chases. But now, nothing moves. The empath's eyes change. The face settles. Concern disappears. The voice flattens. The body no longer leaks distress. It is one of the most unnerving shifts you can witness because it is so still. No scene, no explosion, just a full withdrawal of emotional oxygen. And when the narcissist throws their usual tactics into that empty space, the tactics hit a wall, not a screaming wall, a silent one. That silence tells the truth better than any speech could. The old access is gone. Here is where the script turns even harder. The narcissist often mistakes peace for inability. They see patience and assume powerlessness. They see restraint and assume fear. They see compassion and assume the person has no claws. That is the baseline illusion. The narcissist builds a false profile of the empath based on the empath's decision to avoid unnecessary war. Over time, that false profile feels real to them. They begin to believe the empath is permanently manageable, predictable, safe to exploit, easy to recover after each wound. They think the person will always return to the same emotional setting, but that belief is based on a total misread. What the narcissist took for weakness was often regulation. What they took for passivity was observation. What they took for endless tolerance was controlled delay. The empath was not failing to see what was happening. They were often seeing too much, feeling too much, and trying not to become something colder in response. That effort gets mistaken as surrender. And that is why the reversal shocks the narcissist so deeply. The person they had mentally reduced to a simple target suddenly reveals depth, memory, restraint, and decisive distance. The narcissist thought they had fully mapped the other person. In truth, they barely understood the surface. Meanwhile, the empath has been reading beneath the surface the entire time. This is what creates the huge asymmetry. One person is running old scripts. The other now sees the whole board. One person is pushing emotional buttons. The other person has stepped outside the machine and is watching the wiring. If you are still with me, notice the difference here. This is not about being louder. It is about being harder to move. That is why the room changes. That is why the narcissist starts to lose control. And that is why the old playbook suddenly looks childish under a colder light. The phrase cold empathy sounds harsh, but it explains the mechanism well. Empathy is not only kindness, it is also perception. It is the ability to detect the emotional state, motives, stress signals, and internal conflict of another person with unusual accuracy. In healthy moments, that perception creates care. It helps someone soothe, understand, forgive, and connect. But when survival takes over, the same perception can become purely analytical. The data stream stays on. The softness goes off, and that change matters because the narcissist has usually spent years building a self-protective structure made of image, performance, control, and denial. Most people attack that structure from the outside. They argue, they yell, they prove facts, they explain morals. None of that works for long because the narcissist can twist it, dodge it, or feed on it. But the detached empath is no longer attacking from outside the walls. They already know where the weak beams are. They know which insecurity holds the whole performance together. They know where the false confidence came from. They know what shame is being covered. They know what fear sits behind the need to dominate. That does not mean they need to destroy the other person. It means they can see the truth with painful accuracy. And when truth is spoken without emotional static, it lands differently. A scream can be dismissed as madness. A calm sentence that names the pattern correctly is much harder to escape. That is why the narcissist often becomes more frantic at this stage. They need the empath to become emotional again. They need tears, noise, confusion, defense, anything that reopens the old system. Because if the empath stays calm, the performance has nowhere to go. It collapses under its own emptiness. Watch what happens next, because this is the moment the manipulator starts realizing they are no longer leading the scene. Once the narcissist senses that control is slipping, escalation usually follows. Maybe they turn up the anger. Maybe they suddenly become sweet again. Maybe they try guilt, fear, pity, or a story about how wounded they are. Maybe they switch masks 3 times in 1 hour. All of it has one purpose: recover access, recover emotional movement, recover proof that they still matter enough to shape your state. In the past, some of these tactics worked. The empath would explain, comfort, defend, or try to bring the relationship back to balance. But after the snap, something is different. The empath is no longer trying to repair the illusion. They are seeing the machinery in motion. The love bombing feels timed. The rage feels empty. The tears feel strategic, the blame feels recycled, and because it all looks visible now, the emotional hook weakens. This is when the narcissist begins to feel exposed, even if no one has publicly exposed them. Being truly seen is terrifying for someone who survives through image control. The empath may say very little, sometimes almost nothing. That is enough. The lack of reaction becomes the message. It says, I understand what this is. I am no longer confused. I am no longer available for this script. And that can produce what feels like an identity crisis in the narcissist. They are used to shaping the room. Now the room refuses shape. They are used to pulling emotional strings. Now the strings are cut. They are used to certainty about their target. Now the target is unreadable, calm, and moving toward the exit. This is why silence becomes so powerful. Not because it is dramatic, but because it removes supply. It removes narrative fuel. It removes the feedback loop that kept the whole cycle alive. And without that loop, the narcissist starts confronting something they hate most of all, their own emptiness without an audience to manage it for them. Silence in this stage is not passive. It is active withdrawal. It is the ending of explanation, the ending of self-defense, the ending of trying to be understood by someone committed to misunderstanding you. The narcissist thrives in noise because noise creates confusion, and confusion creates openings. In chaos, they can rewrite motives, flip blame, and turn every reaction into proof of your instability. But stillness ruins that strategy. Stillness does not give them new material. Stillness does not feed the story. Stillness does not chase closure through one more exhausting conversation. It just stands there and makes their tactics look exposed. That is why the quiet exit can be more devastating than any confrontation. The empath stops arguing, stops proving, stops performing pain for someone who already used it as leverage. The body relaxes. The eyes go distant, the voice becomes minimal, the decisions become practical, numbers get blocked, doors close, bags get packed, access ends. And in many cases, that is when the narcissist becomes most desperate. Not because love suddenly appeared, but because relevance is disappearing. To be ignored by someone who once cared deeply can feel unbearable to a person who depends on emotional reflection to stabilize their identity. They may throw out threats, they may promise change, they may rewrite history overnight, they may act like the victim of cold cruelty. But beneath all of it is the same reality. The old control channel is dead. The empath is no longer standing in the storm trying to explain weather to a tornado. They are leaving the building. And that exit, done without chaos, can feel almost unreal to the narcissist. They expected a final battle. Instead, they got absence. They expected collapse. Instead, they got calm. And calm, in this context, can feel more final than rage ever could. The deepest shock for the narcissist is not being insulted. It is being rendered irrelevant. That is the part this kind of relationship often builds toward. The narcissist can handle being feared. They can even work with being hated. Both still keep them at the center. But indifference removes center stage. Indifference says you no longer shape my thoughts, my body, my sleep, my choices, my hope, or my future. And when that truth lands, the narcissist often spirals because their entire strategy was built on remaining psychologically important. The fed-up empath does not need revenge for that collapse to begin. They do not need a dramatic speech. They do not need to expose every secret or list every lie. Sometimes the strongest message is the clean cut itself, the refusal to keep feeding a broken system, the refusal to keep handing care to someone who only learned how to weaponize it, the refusal to keep translating your pain into second chances for the person causing it. This is why the quiet observer can become so dangerous in the eyes of a narcissist, not because they are evil, not because they suddenly become monstrous, but because they finally stop donating warmth to a place that only knew how to exploit it. They stop treating the other person's dysfunction like a puzzle they must solve. They stop confusing compassion with obligation. They stop mistaking endurance for destiny. And in that stopping, something powerful appears. Boundaries with no speech attached. Clarity with no apology attached. Distance with no guilt attached. If you have ever felt this shift inside yourself, then you know it does not feel loud. It feels cold, steady, almost sacred. like a door closing in a part of the soul that will not reopen for that person again. And once that door is closed, the whole relationship changes its meaning. What used to feel like a trap now becomes evidence. What used to feel like confusion now becomes a pattern. What used to feel like love now becomes a lesson. So when people ask who is more dangerous, the loud manipulator or the quiet empath who has finally had enough, the answer depends on what kind of danger you mean. The narcissist is dangerous in the obvious way. They drain, distort, provoke, and control. But the fed-up empath is dangerous in a way the narcissist cannot predict. Because once the emotional bond breaks, the empath becomes impossible to play in the old way. The person who once absorbed everything now filters everything. The person who once gave endless grace now gives none where none is earned. The person who once tried to save the relationship now simply sees it, clearly, fully, without illusion. And that sight alone can undo the entire power structure. The narcissist never planned for a witness who knew the system from the inside and no longer cared to stay inside it. They never planned for someone who understood every lever and chose not to pull a single one. They never planned for calm backed by complete pattern recognition. That is why the end often feels like a psychological eclipse. The noise fades, the light changes, the manipulator looks around and realizes the world is no longer bending with them. The empath is gone in the only way that matters, not physically at first, but emotionally, mentally, spiritually gone. And once that happens, the rest is only logistics. The final truth is simple. Never confuse kindness with weakness. Never confuse patience with blindness. Never confuse a soft voice with a powerless mind. Some people are quiet because they are scared. Others are quiet because they are watching. And when someone who has watched everything finally stops caring enough to stay in the game, that is when the game ends. Cleanly, quietly, completely. If that hit deeper than expected, then you already understand the point. The loudest threat is not always the real one. Sometimes the real threat is the calm person who has learned enough, felt enough, and finally decided that silence is the last answer you will ever get.